spent more time this week talking about history than at any time in the history of HIAC Talk Radio.
That's true.
So why not remain there? So we're going to go back, folks, not as far back as 1492, but we are going to go back to a time where arenas were packed with fans from all different races and ages and sexes. Back when territories ruled the day, back when you can watch a wrestling match straight through with no cuts, no edits, and no retakes, back when sports entertainment was professional wrestling. This is the Wrestling Historian. We're going to go back to June 11th, 1975. The original Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Gene and Ole Anderson, defeated Wahoo McDaniel and Paul Jones for the the Mid-Atlantic version of the NWA World Tag Team titles. Now, back in the 70s, there was NWA's largest wrestling organization in the United States, and because of that, there was different parts of the country that claimed to have the NWA World Tag Team Champions. In Detroit, there was NWA World Tag Team Champions. In San Francisco, under Roy Shire's promotion, they had their version of the NWA World Tag Team title. But the Anderson brothers, Ole and Gene, because of the amount of heat, because of the amount of money, and because of the amount of crowd that they were drawing in the Mid-Atlantic area, their version of the NWA Tag Team Champion became the official NWA World Tag Team Champion, because there were no other teams across the United States, in Detroit, in Texas, in San Francisco, in Canada, that could outperform or outdraw the Andersons. So because of the weight of the Andersons, after their win over Wahoo McDaniel and Paul Jones, their version of the NWA World Tag Team titles became the official NWA World Tag Team titles. And it started with the Andersons, so all the other future NWA World Tag Team titles, World Tag Team champions, the Road Warriors, the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, Tully and Arn, started with the Anderson brothers. June 11th, 1984, speaking of first, Rick Rude defeated Jerry Lawler for the Southern Heavyweight Championship. Rick Rude, managed by Jimmy Hart, defeated Jerry Lawler, and that would be Rick Rude's first singles title of his illustrious career. First time turning heel, and that was his first title. Don't worry about Jerry Lawler though. When Rick Rude defeated, when Rick Rude defeated Jerry Lawler on June 11th, 1984, Dan, for the Southern Heavyweight title, that ended Jerry's 30th reign as Southern Heavyweight Champion.
He was dying in the ring, man. Dying on his feet.
Just saying 30th out of 57 reigns, folks. But June 11th, 1984, Rick Rude won his first ever singles title, first of many for Mr. Rude. Staying on that date, June 11th, 1998, WCW, of all organizations, of all wrestling organizations, ran their third annual Ilio DiPaolo Memorial Show. Ilio DiPaolo was one of the great wrestlers, old-time wrestlers, who frequented the upstate, the northern states, in most importantly Buffalo and New York State. So WCW had their third annual Ilio DiPaolo Memorial Show, and they had a lot of great Hall of Famers that were there. Gino Brito, who was their first tag team partner, the late Dino Bravo. Luthez was there, Waldo Von Erich, and Angelo Poffo was there. And his own son, Randy, also wrestled on that card. But the main event for that match, June 11th, that card, June 11th, 1998, in Buffalo, which drew 15,395 fans, by the way, was the unlikely tag team bout featuring Kevin Nash teaming up with Lex Luger to go against, and for what I understand is their first time ever as a tag team, the then WCW Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart. June 11th, 1998. Staying on that day, June. Yeah. And one of the things that we didn't talk about was Bret Hart was on last night's Backstage, WWE Backstage, which shows on FS1 Tuesday nights. It was Bret Hart and special guest CM Punk, and they were just talking one-on-one. I DVR'd it. I believe it's on demand.
I
So
missed that.
wrestling
I gotta
fans,
look. Yeah, I gotta look
yes.
that. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the few things that I actually paid attention to when I watched Monday Night Raw was their advertising. Not only the Survivor Series 1996, The Rock's first, but it was afterwards. It was CM Punk doing an interview with Bret Hart, and later on Booker T joined them and Renee Jones. And Bret said one of the more telling things he said, and I'll get back to wrestling historian, was if he knew then what he knows now, he would have found a way to stay in the WWE. That he never would have left.
I mean, would you have?
Knowing that the WCW was just a living, breathing train wreck at the time, no. And Bret even revealed that Vince said when he said I can't honor your contract, you take the offer from WCW, but, and this is Vince McMahon saying this, they have no idea how to use you. There, they wouldn't have any idea how to use you. Who would think that Vince McMahon, of all people, he knew that WCW would drop the ball on Bret Hart, the hottest wrestler on earth,
hottest wrestler coming off one of the hottest
and
work shoot angles in the world,
in the history of wrestling, and they still found a way to blow it. So yeah, Bret Hart on and CM Punk on WWE Backstage. Check that out. But on June 11th, 1998, 22 years ago, he teamed up with Hulk Hogan for what I believe is the first, last, and only time. And it was in WCW. They never teamed up in the WWE, despite spending more than 15 years together in the same company. That was the first time they ever teamed up. June 11th, 2006. I included this just because it was one of the more memorable pay-per-views I've ever seen. And you're going to notice a theme, Dan, on this week's edition of Wrestling Historian. June 11th, 2006 was ECW's second one-night stand pay-per-view at the Hammerstein Ballroom, the madhouse of hardcore. 2,460 fans were in attendance. And the main event, in one of the most partisan crowds I've ever seen, Rob Van Dam went up against the WWE heavyweight champion John Cena. And if you remember that crowd, pro ECW crowd, John Cena walking through the crowd with the WWE belt high overhead, not saying a word. And when John did his signature moves to take off his shirt and throw it to the crowd threw the shirt back. Not once, but 3 times. So this is John Cena being a heel. And it worked out amazingly. And in the end, it was Rob Van Dam fulfilling a dream in the international madhouse of hardcore, pinning John Cena to win the WWE Heavyweight Championship in an ECW arena. An incredible moment, incredible pay-per-view, and I just remember that match for how memorable the crowd was more than anything else. And that's one of the things that I miss, the crowd being that rapid for one match or towards one guy.
Yeah.
Also, June 11th, 2015, 5 years ago, I lost my favorite wrestler of all time. We said goodbye to the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
I will never, ever, ever forget. I was driving to Jersey and was sitting in like kind of bumper to bumper traffic. It was where 295. It's where 95 North, when you're going from DC up through Maryland and you're going north, but it kind of merges off so you don't go back around the Beltway.
Uh-huh.
It was just all merging together. So there's like a 2-mile backup. Took about 20 minutes, but it was back bumper to bumper. And something told me, check your phone. Right across the top. Dusty Rhodes has passed away. If there was ever a voice in wrestling that we would need right now, especially with all the S hitting the fan, the joke is book it like dust, the dusty finish.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that is a voice sorely missed, man.
most definitely. You know, the people. I've seen a couple of people replay the hard time speech. I think right after the protest started, when he talked about hard time, and I want you to reach out and touch my hand right now. Because we all together. Because Dusty Rhodes was one of the most unifying uh, wrestlers in pro wrestling history. I would say Bruno is my favorite wrestler, but Dusty Rhodes is who made me a wrestling fan. Bruno was this mythical creature that never wrestled on television, but when Dusty Rhodes was on TV, it was magnetic. You could listen to him talk, watch him in the ring, watch his moves, watch how he had the crowd in the palm of his hand. And it was everyone. It was black people. It was white people. It was women. It was men. It was children. It was small dogs. It was everyone that that loved Dusty. And his promo, Hard Times promo was one, but my favorite one was when he talked about, when I was a kid, when I was like 8 years old, I started digging ditches at 8 years old, and I grew up so sweet. And I've walked and I've wined and dined with kings and queens, and I've slept in alleys and dined on pork and beans. And again, ain't nothing wrong with pork and beans, there, Jack. I've had many of them. Just because I drive a big car now, don't make me bad. Because he would also, he wasn't, he would mind. He was a man of the people, but he also talked about how big his car was, and he's a working man, and a son of a plumber, but he come into the ring with with Ric Flair type robes, you know, and I think one of the biggest things about Dusty that you have to understand in his feud with Ric Flair. Here's Ricky Steamboat against Ric Flair. Ricky Steamboat, wife, baby, family man, family values. Ric Flair, 5 women, one on each arm, and Steamboat's the heel. And they're booing Steamboat, and they're cheering Ric Flair. Meanwhile, Dusty, working man, son of a plumber. Ric Flair, same guy. Women everywhere, and he's booed. And Dusty Rhodes, working man, who has just as flashy robes as Flair, he's cheered. It's because the fans love Dusty. That's the magnetic pull of Dusty Rhodes. Him showing up at Madison Square Garden out of nowhere, place would go nuts. When I was looking at doing our homework assignment for our future HIAC Talk Radio show, Dan and I are going to be reviewing some matches from the past, from the 70s, and some of them are back in Madison Square Garden. And what made the Madison Square Garden so magic was you wouldn't know who would show up month in and month out. It could be someone from the AWA, it could be someone from the NWA, it could be someone from Championship Wrestling from Florida or Georgia Championship Wrestling. When Dusty Rhodes would just show up, the place would go nuts because they knew they were seeing something spectacular, because you never saw anyone move like Dusty like that. And to hear the Vince McMahon cackle, ha 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 ha, when Dusty gets in the ring, absolutely amazing. I even went off a homework assignment and watched Dusty against Superstar September 30th, 1977 at Madison Square Garden again, just because the crowd still gives me goosebumps. But we lost the American Dream June 11th, 2015.
Something that didn't occur to me until, timely, recently, is how, and you just touched upon this. Rev, I do have an excuse. I don't have access to that television because I'm practically married, so I might not be able to get to the TV. That's what I mean. When I say I might not be able to, that's because I answer to a higher power sometimes, brother.
Yeah. And her name's Kelly.
And her name is Kelly. And she's taller than me, and she will kill me. So something you touched upon that it kind of occurred to me rewatching his DVD a short time ago is his appeal to African-American kids.
Yeah.
Which far outreach sometimes, depending on that. Yes, you include here's a example, Exhibit A, Mr. Keglions. But sometimes overreached the white kids because of how he was and what he stood for and how he talked and how he moved and how he jived. Literally was Dusty, which brought me to this point, which I want you to touch upon that, growing up being enamored with Dusty, and why when you have Dusty Rhodes in the company, you would ever push something called Akeem the African Dream.
I've never understood that, and that was part of when I first started hating the WWE. Um, and when my introduction to Dusty Rhodes, when Championship Wrestling from Florida first started, when Vince McMahon Sr. had a handshake deal with Eddie Graham, that they would start running Championship Wrestling from Florida in the Northeast, and there would be a talent exchange. So Kevin Sullivan would come up, and Mike Graham and Bob Backlund and Steve Kern would all of a sudden start wrestling in the WWF, and Backlund ended up staying. But Dusty Rhodes was part of that deal to face off against Superstar. But before that, on Championship Wrestling from Florida, it would come on, and I knew it was an alternative from the WWF slow style I was used to. Championship Wrestling from Florida had Gordon Soley, and they had Blood, and they had all these. And then one time I had my back turned, I heard this guy talking about he's going to do something funky upside of your head, Missouri Mola. And when I get you, Mola, I'm going to say, this guy sounds like my Uncle Leon. Who is this? And then I see this huge, round, white man with a blonde afro just putting the bad mouth on the Missouri Mola and Bob Roop and all you get. I'm getting you down to there. I'm going to get funky on you. And I think, I didn't know that people that look like that talk like that. And I knew I didn't feel patronized. It's like he's not trying to be black.
Oh, he is. That is the way he is.
That's exactly how we talked. And I was like, who is this guy? And then I saw him in the ring, and he's moving like that, and he's taking. And then the bionic elbow came out, and the flip flop and fly, and I'm cheering in my bedroom, 11 years old, saying this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. But Akeem, obviously a Vince McMahon thing where everyone had to be characters, and started with my hatred of the WWF, and even going on the Arsenio Hall show. It was bad enough when wrestlers were going to. It was bad enough when the wrestlers would go on the Arsenio Hall show dressed in their wrestling outfits. They couldn't even take it off. They couldn't even dress in a suit or just casual. But the fact that Slick said that Akeem would be the first black world heavyweight champion is what did it for me. So after that, there was nothing. Yeah, he said that. Joe Goodhart even brought that up on his wrestling radio talk show that weekend. He said, I was offended by that. You can't get more
whiter than me.
Oh yeah, you can't get whiter than Joe Goodhart. But he said when I heard when Slick said down in our City Hall show, I thought that was really offensive. I thought that was one of the most offensive things.
See, I didn't even know that. I just because I told you I'm in the I'm rewatching 89. I'm in 1990. I went back chronologically 1990. You all know that. But WrestleMania 6. I'm watching WrestleMania 6, and Dusty, Sapphire, and Macho Man and Sherry. Great match. It's quick. Mm-hmm. Great cluster effery with Sherry and Sapphire. Sapphire bumping her around the ring was cracking me up. That was great. But then it cuts to Slick and Akeem against the Big Boss Man.
Twin Towers broke up. Yep.
And I was just looking at it going, maybe it's just because the atmosphere of the world today, but this is really stupid.
Yes.
Blew my white mind.
And 2 years prior to that, they were fighting over the UWF heavyweight title in the Mid-South, and now they're the Big Boss Man and Akeem. They went from Big Bubba Rogers and the one-man gang to Big Boss Man and Akeem, the African Dream. Yes. Yeah. So we lost Dusty June 11th, 2015. June 12th, starting of the theme, June 12th, 1991, Clash of Champions 15, Dan, aired. And two of the matches that stuck out for me, making his WCW Clash of Champions debut was one stunning Steve Austin. And he defeated Joey Maggs in under 30 seconds. And I remember this kid from World Class, and it's like, man, he's in WCW. I hope he gets the shot he deserves. I hope they push him well, and the 30-second win, and that was all I needed to know. And Steve Austin was off and running in WCW for that time. The main event was a 2 out of 3 fall match for the WCW Heavyweight Championship. Ric Flair defeated Bobby Eaton in a 2 out of 3 fall match, and Bobby Eaton's first and only world title shot in WCW. And he pinned Flair in the first fall. Flair won by a count on the second fall, and Flair won the third fall. I forget how, but Bobby Eaton got a ton of credit for that, and rightfully so. And Jim Cornette even said so, that that really put Bobby Eaton on the mat, and that was the beginning of Bobby Eaton's singles push that would lead him to the WCW TV title that he would eventually lose to the aforementioned stunning Steve Austin. But that was Clash of Champions 15 that aired live on TBS June 12, 1991. Did a 3.9, Jared, that night. June 12th, 2005 was the first ECW One Night Stand that I had on my DVR for a good 12 years because this was the return of ECW, and they brought back all the current WWE superstars that were ECW stalwarts. They put them together, and it was probably, it still is one of my top 5 favorite pay-per-views of all time. Because they brought everyone back, even the ones that weren't in the WWE, they brought them back for this one night stand. Lance Storm defeated Chris Jericho. And Chris Jericho came out in his Lionheart trunks, which was a great callback for him. Psychosis against Rey Mysterio. Psychosis of Rey Mysterio is the cruiserweight version of Steamboat and Flair. In the interesting twist, though, Psychosis came into the ring wearing his mask, but he took it off to wrestle. And showing that Rey and Psychosis, unfortunately, their best days were kind of behind them. They put on classic matches in ECW, and this one didn't quite measure up to the point where fans were yelling at Psychosis to put back on his mask. Maybe they thought that putting the mask on, they would recapture their old glory. They didn't. Still a good match, but nowhere near up to the level of past Psychosis and Rey Mysterio matches. Also, Chris Benoit defeated Eddie Guerrero. Again, those guys had classic matches. Not in ECW, though. They never had a match in ECW, but they had classic matches in WCW and in Japan. This one didn't quite measure up. Still very good, though. Chris Benoit had the crossface on Eddie Guerrero for a full minute before Eddie finally tapped out. Mike Awesome defeated Masato Tanaka. Their match was just like their matches were in ECW. Lots of chair shots. I still cringe whenever I see the Mike Awesome power bomb. He throws Tanaka out backwards and he lands through a table. And Awesome won with a dive over the top rope onto Tanaka and the table. It was after the match, though, where Mike Awesome power bombed referee Jim Molyneux, and it was kind of caught off camera. But in doing that, Mike Awesome tore his ACL, and he had to be walked off, helped out of the ring, and that. But you can kind of see that in the corner of the shot after the match, because all this happened after the match was over, and that, unfortunately, because of the tear, because he powerbombed Jim Molyneux, because he tore his knee, that would end up to be the last match in the career, the awesome career of Mike Awesome. But more telling, though, was the main event. The Dudley Boys went up against Tommy Dreamer and Sandman, and ended in a huge brawl. Because remember, this is part of the invasion. The WWE superstars came there to invade, led by JBL, who got booed unmercifully out of the building, and some other WWE stars. And he even got into a sparring match with Paul Lee, when Paul Lee said the infamous line, "The only reason why you're the WWE champion on SmackDown because Triple H didn't feel like working on Tuesday nights." And then they got into a big brawl at the end, followed by Stone Cold Steve Austin, who reminded everyone that he was an ECW wrestler as well. But probably the thing it's most known for was JBL, the aforementioned JBL, taking whatever frustration he had out on the Blue Meanie and punching him legitimately and busting him open. And later on, I think it was a week later on Monday Night Raw when Stevie Richards went up against JBL, the chair shot heard around the world was his receipt for him punching the Blue Meanie for real. Uh, from what I understand, Meanie and JBL are cool now, but those punches that busted up the Brian Heffron were real, and it happened ECW at the end of ECW One Night Stand, June 12th, 2005. Another theme we're going to have here is birthdays and death days. Dan, if you'll bear with me, June 13th, we on 1982, we lost to cancer. High Chief Peter Maivia. I heard the news through a newspaper report that he had died of cancer. And he was only 45, but an illustrious,
Wow.
yeah, uh, illustrious career. He was the beginning of the Samoan dynasty. Um, he and Afa and Sika, while not related, started while Peter Maivia was the top babyface in AWA and Texas and a lot of other tournaments. The Samoans would rule the roost in the tag team as far as regional. Peter Maivia had great matches with Nick Bockwinkel in the AWA before coming to the WWF and having a great match with Superstar Billy Graham at Madison Square Garden. Superstar still called him one of the toughest men he ever faced in the ring
Wow.
before his heel turn when he would turn on Bob Backlund and start his heel run in WWF, and he would be a heel for the rest of his career, even sporting a mustache. He did come back for one final time in the WWF where he teamed up with his countrymen, the Samoans, for a one-time only match against Pat Patterson, Rocky Johnson, and Tony Atlas, and that was his swan song in the WWF. Probably before best known for his cameo in the Bond film "You Only Live Twice." His fight against Sean Connery. You can even see how tough he was back then. He physically moved the couch with one hand. He just picked it up and just tossed it across the room, which was a shoot at the time that wasn't in the script. They needed room to fight, and Maivia just reached down and just threw the couch against the wall, and it scared the crap out of Sean Connery. But that was his movie debut. But we lost Peter Maivia, The Rock's grandfather, June 13th, 1992. Also, June 13th, 1993, the WWF had their first televised King of the Ring. The King of the Ring had been a tournament in the WWF for about 7 years, but the first time it was televised was June 13th, 1993. And Bret Hart pinned future Intercontinental Champions Razor Ramon and Curt Hennig before defeating Bam Bam Bigelow in the finals to win his second King of the Ring. He won 2 years earlier, and Bret Hart still to this day is the only man to win 2 King of the Rings. After that bout, he was attacked by Jerry Lawler, who had just started with the WWF and was still claiming to be king, and that started their feud, the Jerry Lawler-Bret Hart feud. But most importantly, on that card, that King of the Ring pay-per-view, the first ever televised King of the Ring, June 13th, 1993, would be Yokozuna regaining the WWF Heavyweight title by pinning Hulk Hogan for only the second time that Hulk Hogan has ever been pinned in the WWF. Granted, he had help from a Japanese photographer whose flash went off in flames in Hulk Hogan's face, causing him to lose his sight momentarily. But it enabled Yokozuna to pin Hulk Hogan for only the second time in WWF history at the time. And Yokozuna would regain the WWF Heavyweight title.
Wow.
And also on June 13th, happy belated birthday to Mike Jones, whom you may know as Soul Train Jones, whom you may know as Vincent,
Yeah.
and whom you all know as Virgil.
Didn't he also go by Shane for like 2 weeks?
Yes.
Shane. He goes,
Yeah,
my
and
real
in
name,
what
Shane. And just
Shane. Yeah, and in one of the most cringe-worthy photos I think ever taken was a picture of Mike Jones in a New York City subway wearing an NWO shirt, uh, wanting to have autographs and just nothing but an empty table and absolutely no one paying attention to him. And the same thing happened when I saw him at conventions with I think I told you when I saw him with Raven. He and Raven had booths right next to each other. Raven's was packed, but absolutely no one was in Virgil's line, um, which is sad. But he's still here. He's still with us. So happy belated 58th birthday to Mike Soul Train Vincent Virgil Shane Jones.
One of the funny things about nice guy. He
Yeah.
also is figuring out the IG thing and the Joey Janela stuff, and he's figuring out social media more and more every day. So he's really funny and really good. But it made me laugh because we did WrestleFest. I don't even know what year that was anymore. But we were one of the vendors, along with other wrestlers, and Dean was the MC. We were there working. And I went over, and I just introduced myself to everybody. Hey, how you doing? Well, except for the ECW guys. I stayed away from them. Raven, I stayed away from. Sandman, I didn't go near New Jack. It's just like, hey, how you doing?
Me
King
neither.
Kong Bundy, just New Jack as a general rule, not skin color, just because
Yeah.
it's New Jack.
Mm. I'm black and I stay away from New Jack. We have nothing in common.
Um, uh, Vincent, Virgil, that's what I will call him. Virgil was there. He was right next to King Kong Bundy. So King Kong Bundy was great. The late, great King Kong Bundy. He was just happy to be around people. I could just tell that he liked doing these things.
I took a picture of King Kong Bundy, and he took a picture of me taking a picture of him.
What year was that?
I want to say 90.
Yeah, sounds about right. So this was 2014, I think.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But right next to his table was Vincent, and I'm just saying, "Hi, how you doing?" And I shake his hand, and he doesn't know I'm a nobody.
Yeah.
So I get it, but he was like, "Hey, if you want to buy something," I was like, "I'm just saying hi. I'll come back later." I never went back. I wasn't buying anything. I don't want anything.
Yeah. And that was his pitch. And I always felt bad for him. Yeah. But happy belated birthday, Mike Jones. He's still with us. So many of his contemporaries aren't, as we'll get to later on in this segment of Wrestling Historian.
Oh man.
Speaking of which, June 14th would have been the 61st birthday of one Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer.
Oh wow.
Buzz Sawyer, one of the great heels. You know, last week we touched upon the passing of Mr. Wrestling 2 and the popularity of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Buzz Sawyer was one of those guys that made Georgia Championship Wrestling Georgia Championship Wrestling. He was one of the top heels. His feud with Tommy Rich kind of defined Georgia Championship Wrestling because Tommy Rich was a fair-haired, blonde, pretty boy, and Buzz Sawyer was a mad dog. He was a 5'10" squat man that had thighs for days and had the single greatest power slam in professional wrestling history. You want to see a power slam? Go to the WWE Network, go to YouTube, go Buzz Sawyer power slam, and you will see the quickest, most vertical. He would grab you, and both of you would be perpendicular to the mat at the same time when he'd flip you over. Absolutely incredible, the power of the explosion. A Buzz Sawyer power slam is a work of art, folks. Can't say that enough. Another claim to fame that Buzz Sawyer had, if you watch the Undertaker's interview with Stone Cold during the Stone Cold Skull sessions, he talked about Undertaker wanted to break into wrestling, and his first teacher was Buzz Sawyer. So he and his friends went to his house and knocked on the door, and Buzz Sawyer answered it, not quite naked, but not all the way closed either, and took them out back into his garage and his driveway to teach them wrestling. So not a lot was learned, but as far as the Undertaker goes, but Buzz Sawyer was his first wrestling teacher. And what do you know? After 2 weeks of going back, Undertaker, he and his friends, they come back the next another time, and what do you know? Buzz Sawyer's gone. Everything, house cleaned out, gone. So he was on to the next town. But Buzz Sawyer, one of the great heels in professional wrestling. The last Tangle, the last Battle of Atlanta, his fight with Tommy Rich, where the first time there was a cage match with a roof to culminate their feud. Uh, and one of the more gruesome aspects of Buzz Sawyer was on a Clash of Champions, which is one of our themes of HIAC, when he came off the top rope on a body splash and had his landed with both of his hands outstretched and completely broke his wrist, compound fracture on live TV. One of the more gruesome injuries. Buzz Sawyer. This is when he was part of the JTEX Corporation with the Great Muta and Gary Hart. But Buzz Sawyer definitely will be missed. He would have been 61 on June 14th. June 14th, 1981, Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne defeated the team of Adrian Adonis and the future governor Jesse the Body Ventura for the AWA Tag Team Championship. This title win is historic because they would not lose the belt for another 2 years and 6 months. And that was in 1981, and no tag team since then in any federation has held a tag team title longer than Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell. Not in the NWA, not in the WWF, not in the dying days of the AWA, not in World Class, not ECW, nowhere. Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne, when they won the title June 14th, 1981 from Adrian Adonis and Jesse Ventura, still have the longest tag team title reign in professional wrestling history, going on 39 years now.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Last week I told you about the IWGP title that Hulk Hogan won, the first IWGP champion, after he inadvertently knocked out Antonio Inoki. Well, June 14th, 1984, Antonio Inoki regained the IWGP title by defeating Hulk Hogan to become only the second man to hold the IWGP Heavyweight Champion. That's International Wrestling Grand Prix, if you're scoring at home, kids. June 14th. Oh, my God. I'm turning into Peter Brady.
You need a break? You need a minute?
I don't need a minute. I'm not losing. We're not losing our
We're not losing.
No, we're not gonna lose you guys. I'm not gonna lose you again. Damn it. June 14th, 1989. Clash of Champions 7. Dan, from Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. But back then, in one of the hotter venues that both Jim Ross and Jim Cornette will tell you, this is one of the hottest arenas they've ever performed in. The arena in the formerly Fort Bragg was hot anyway because it had no ventilation. It was an army barracks. But you add a ton of TV lights and cameras, and the heat goes up exponentially. But this Clash of Champions was known for a couple of things. It was the finals of the NWA Tag Team Tournament, NWA Tag Team Title Tournament, the NWA World Tag Team titles that were first originated by the Anderson brothers. Well, the finals would be the Freebirds defeating the babyface Midnight Express. And the Freebirds would win their first NWA Tag Team titles. And the Freebirds would be Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, so it really didn't count. But that still didn't stop Michael.
You really don't like those Freebirds. I love it.
No.
I love it.
And didn't stop Michael Hayes from, after winning the NWA Tag Team title, him going, finally. The Freebirds, just like the Road Warriors, had been synonymous with the NWA and great tag teams, but they had never won the NWA Tag Team titles. And as far as I'm concerned, because Terry Gordy didn't win with Michael Hayes, they still have never won the NWA Tag Team titles. But they did on that night, June 14th, 1989. Also, the main event was Ricky Steamboat defeated Terry Funk by disqualification. And remember, Ric Flair was still out of commission. And Ricky Steamboat, before the match, was deemed the number one contender. So when Terry Funk attacked Ricky Steamboat after the bout, Lex Luger came running in with a chair.
Oh, goody.
And Lex Luger, because people had thought that Lex Luger was upset that he was not named the number one contender. And he grabbed the mic after saving Ricky Steamboat and say, people think I got too much ego. I don't. I just have a lot of pride. Come on, Ricky, let's go. And he picks up Ricky Steamboat and proceeds to clothesline the hell out of him. And here JR say, don't do that. Don't do that. And then they hit Ricky Steamboat in the back with a chair after Ricky was begging Lex not to do it, hitting Ricky Steamboat in the back with a chair. And Luger going, there lies your number one contender. And Jim Ross saying, that's right, he's the number one contender, and Luger can't stand it. And thankfully, Sting ran in to help out Ricky Steamboat. But if that wasn't enough, Dan, and by God, don't you think it ought to be, the biggest thing that came out of that Clash of Champions 7 in formerly Fort Bragg, North Carolina, wasn't the heel turn of Lex Luger, wasn't the fake Freebirds winning the NWA Tag Team Championship. It was the debut of the Ding Dongs.
Oh, no. No.
Straight out of Belleville.
Oh, God. Let it die.
Yes. Can you imagine if they got over it, though? Thankfully, they didn't. But
who were the Ding Dongs?
I still don't know.
All right, let me look it up, because depending on who it was, if it got over, it would have been fine. Ding Dongs.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Keep telling me it's about the Ding Dongs.
Okay, but that was June 14th, 1989. Clash of Champions 7. Oh, by the way, that Clash of Champions did a 3.8.
Oh, they were the Rock and Roll Rebels.
Oh, okay.
Greg Evans and Richard Sartan.
Oh. Good.
So never mind. Bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. But that Clash of Champions did a 3.8. June 15th, out of big birthdays, Scott Norton, who we now know was part of the Road Warrior Minnesota Bouncer contingent, turned 59. Happy belated birthday, Scott Norton. Chuck Palumbo, formerly of with Chuck and Billy and Chuck, turned 49. She made it very clear on Monday night. Bailey Dulstraps turned 31 on June 15th.
Bailey.
And he would have been 58, one of the great workers, and I will still go down, is still one of the most underrated, underutilized talents in professional wrestling. You know, I mentioned Gino Hernandez as someone who left us too soon, who had a ton of talent and would have seen that realized. This person was with us throughout his career and was never fully realized, but he would have been 58 today. Still can't believe he's gone. Happy belated birthday to Brad Armstrong.
Oh, man, he was one of those guys by name that you look at the family line and it's obvious they were that good. Yeah. And I'm not taking anything away from Road Dogg Jesse James by saying he was the least. I want to see least talented because he's a talented guy.
Yeah, he was the best talker out of the.
He's the best talker, not the best wrestler in the family. Let me say it like that. Yeah. I have no issues with Road Dogg Jesse James. Zero. Brad Armstrong was so goddamn good that generation. And the fact that we only talk about him as a what if kind of sucks.
And you can say, you know, the Armstrong curse, and you can look that up. And for those of you professional wrestling fans know, the Armstrong may have been a thing or may not be a thing, because Bullet Bob, who's another great talker, Bullet Bob Armstrong, the Armstrongs, period. You know, we talk about wrestling families, the Harts, the Guerreros, the Armstrongs. They all could talk, they all could work, they all could wrestle. Collegiately, they could fight, they just everything. The Armstrongs were like the family that had a whole, gave birth to a whole bunch of total packages. Wrestlers that could do everything. Steve, Scott, Steve as the referee, Scott as one of the Wild Out Southern boys. But Bob, either it's Bullet Bob or just Bob Armstrong, even during their early years of Smoky Mountain when he was the commissioner as the Bullet. His promos opposite Jim Cornette still put every promo guy right now outside of MJF to shame. Brad Armstrong was not only most physically fit, most physically gifted, picture perfect drop kicks, could do everything perfect in the ring. As much as I marvel at, I look at Randy Orton as what Brad Armstrong would have been had he still been with us,
Okay, yeah.
because he can do everything and he looks amazing. When he turned, I always said they stuck him with stupid gimmick after stupid gimmick in WCW. He was Candyman, he was Arachnaman, he was Fantasia, he wrestled under a mask with the Freebirds. Um, but I always say turn him heel and give him a new gimmick because the guy could talk, the guy looked great. The Armstrong curse was because Bob was so good at what he did, it's like the industry wanted to take it out on his sons because they could never please Bob Armstrong and never get to the level of Bob Armstrong. So it was called the Armstrong curse. Even when when Scotty Flamingo uh, feuded with Brad Armstrong over the WCW light heavyweight title, he even alluded to the Armstrong curse. So it was a real, maybe it had been an industry thing, but whatever reason, Brad Armstrong never got the push, the shake he deserved. Every stupid gimmick he was ever gotten, ever given, he took it and ran with it. But his work in the ring was impeccable. I said it last week during one of the Clash of Champions. It's Clash of Champions week, in case you didn't know the theme of this week's edition of HIAC Talk Radio. But his match with Barry Windham was a classic because again you had two second generation guys who could just go. Brett Armstrong would have been 58, but one of the people I point to when I think, man, he could have been should have been one of the best, one of the greatest of all time. Speaking of people left us too soon and one of the greatest of all time, uh, those are all the birthdays that happened June 15th, but June 15th, 1996, we had to say goodbye to another all-time great. June 15th, 1996, Dick Murdoch died of a heart attack at age 49. Uh, Dick Murdoch, one of the great workers uh, ever in professional wrestling. A little known story. In 1969, the NWA heavyweight champion Gene Kiniski and most of the NWA would have their annual NWA International Convention, where all the promoters would come together. Even the WWF promoters would come to the NWA convention to talk about their territories, other wrestlers that could come, and who their eventual world champions would be. Well, in 1969, Gene Kiniski made some remarks about who should be NWA champion, and it was down to three folks. It was Dick Murdoch, Bill Watts, and Dory Funk Jr. as to who would be the next NWA champion. Bill Watts already had his mind set on being a force in the Mid South and running his own promotion. But it was down to Dory Funk Jr. and Dick Murdoch. Dory Funk, obviously, you know history. Dory Funk would defeat Gene Kiniski and eventually be the NWA champion, and he would hold that belt for 2 years. But Dick Murdoch was under serious consideration to be a future NWA champion. He would go on to hold every regional uh, title there was. He would team up with his fellow West Texas alum Dusty Rhodes to form the Texas Outlaws. They would win a version of the NWA Tag Team title in Texas before there was one NWA Tag Team champion. They would have a great run in the AWA against Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens and other great tag teams. But they were, for those, and it's kind of like a Babe Ruth, Will Chamberlain thing. If you didn't see them, then you kind of missed it. There really is no definitive tape of matches of the Outlaws of Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes. Plenty of still photographs, but as far as actual matches, they're kind of scarce. Dick Murdoch would go on to be a multi-time Missouri State champion back when the Missouri heavyweight title was seen as the number two belt in the NWA because of the amount of hold influence that Sam Muchnick, the promoter of uh, in Missouri, had, and he was a former NWA president. And because the NWA headquarters were in St. Louis, Missouri State champion was a big deal. And Murdoch held that belt 3 times. And also, he gave birth to one of the great angles in professional wrestling history, folks, in the Mid South. And if you're listening right now, if you're a fan of product of what you call wrestling today, this is how you book a feud involving Dick Murdoch. Ric Flair, the NWA champion, he would go all over to every different territory, but when he would come to a specific territory, he would only defend it against the #1 contender or whoever that territory's champion was. Ric Flair was coming into the Mid South, and he did not want anything to do with Butch Reed. Butch Reed earlier that year had pinned Ric Flair on TV, and their match went the whole 30-minute time limit. Rick asked for 5 more minutes. In that 5-minute period, Butch Reed pinned Ric Flair. Ric Flair was coming to the Mid-South. Butch Reed was there. He didn't want nothing to do with Butch Reed, so he said, the only person I'm going to wrestle is the North American champion. And that happened to be his buddy, Dick Murdoch. So I'm not wrestling anyone but the North American champion, Dick Murdoch. You're safe with me, baby. I got you. Rick, you don't have to worry about any of these stiffs. You want to wrestle me, I'll wrestle you, but it ain't gonna be no fight. I just want you to leave the NWA as the NWA champion. I got you. We're good. Well, before Rick got there, Dick Murdoch would lose his North American title to Butch Reed. So Butch Reed was ready to face Ric Flair. Ric Flair, not to be outdone, put a $25,000 bounty on the head of Butch Reed. Dick Slater collected it, injured the neck of Butch Reed, knocked him out of the title picture. So Butch Reed, the North American champion, couldn't face Ric Flair. Dick Slater got his $25,000. So they needed a new #1 contender to face Ric Flair. Mid-South picked Ted DiBiase, who was the #1 heel at the time of Mid-South, to face Ric Flair. Dick Murdoch, also a heel, came in the ring and said, Teddy, this kind of really was my shot. I should be the #1 contender. I was a North American champion before Butch Reed, so if he can't go, I should be #1. And Ted said, I appreciate it, Dick, but, Bill Watts gave it to me, so I'm going to face Ric Flair for the NWA title. Dick Murdoch immediately turns on Ted DiBiase, runs his head into the steel post. Ted DiBiase's busted open. He's bleeding a gusher, but he still has an NWA title shot later on that night during the telecast. So with a bandage around his head, he goes out in the ring and has a match of his life against Ric Flair, and the fans immediately start cheering for Ted DiBiase. After Ric Flair wins by cheating, Ted DiBiase falls out of the ring. Dick Murdoch picks him up and gives him a pile driver on the concrete floor. So, just like that, Ric Flair escapes as the NWA champion. Butch Reed is more of a sympathetic babyface, and Ted DiBiase becomes the #1 face in the Mid-South, and Dick Murdoch makes all that happen.
Amazing.
In one of the great angles in professional wrestling history. That's how you tell a story, folks.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Amazing.
But we lost the great Dick Murdoch, June 15th, 1996. June 16th, more birthdays. Jim Hellwig would have been 61 on that day. Recognizing you, Jim Hellwig. If you want to hear a really funny story on Jim Cornette's podcast, if you're into that, there's a tape of when he and Steve Borden first burst on the scene as the Freedom Fighters.
Nope, we don't need to see that at all.
Okay. Well, Phil Hickerson said in kind of a shoot, the only thing you're good at is sticking needles in your butt to making you big and muscular. Yeah, because I'll take you out right now.
Wow.
Yeah, that was on Memphis TV.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Whoops. Also celebrating a belated birthday, as if they're using real names. Jim Helwig would have been 61, but James Fullington turned 58.
Sandman.
Yes, happy belated birthday to the Sandman.
He had a weird debut in WCW. Do you remember that all of a sudden he was just there?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even a match. It was in a vignette where Raven was just faking being miserable all the time.
Yeah. And there he was, hardcore hack.
I just remember going, Sandman's there. What the?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess he's there. And then he was hacked.
They did the same thing with Stevie Richards. They were focusing on Raven, and Stevie Richards just showed up out of nowhere, and Raven just beat the crap out of him.
I just remember being excited about Stevie Richards being there, thinking we were going to get Stevie Richards from ECW, and then and he's gone.
Yeah. I guess they were betting on all the ECW fans following the WCW, so they would automatically know that that's Raven and that's Stevie, and they have a love-hate relationship. But it fell flat.
They did the same thing to Hack that they did to Sabu. They brought Sandman in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem with the name. Hack was fine. They had a great 4 months there with him, with Bam Bam and Raven, and adding people into the hardcore stuff. That was really entertaining. Nothing like the ECW stuff, but it was a different kind of entertainment. It helped having Bobby at rings at the announcer's table.
Yeah.
Chastity was brought in there. You ever see her movie?
Oh.
I have. But then it kind of hit this formula like Sabu did, where it was the same. This is not hit. I'm not making a comment on whose fault it was. It was probably the boogers. Just do your thing. Same thing every week to the point where people stopped caring, and he was back in ECW. Thankfully for him, because that's where he belonged, and that's where he thrived. Same thing with Sabu. It became the same thing, very formulaic, and he was gone. Not formulaic in a good way. It was just to say, all right, let's go, man. Go back where you thrive.
Definitely. Speaking of thriving, this is one of my favorite cards. June 16th, 1993, Clash of Champions 23 in Norfolk, Virginia. The ring announcing done by first of all, Jesse Ventura on commentary, great. But the ring announcer was Michael Buffer, and he really got the crowd going. And the two matches that stuck out was Barry Windham defended the NWA title against Too Cold Scorpio. And an incredible, and even Jesse Ventura was saying, what a match. Those two really turned it on. So Clash of Champions 23, Barry Windham versus Too Cold Scorpio. Don't sleep on that. Great match, even by Jesse Ventura standards. The main event, though, was the NWA Tag Team Champions, the Hollywood Blondes, going up against Arn Anderson. And in his first match back after returning to the NWA or WCW, after leaving with so much controversy, introduced as the Horsemen, Arn Anderson and Ric Flair against the Hollywood Blondes. And to hear Michael Buffer's introduction, they even got Arn Anderson hype. Okay? That's how big it was. And it had a really big match feel to it. And even Jesse Ventura said after Michael Buffer introduced Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, the 16-time professional wrestling heavyweight champion of the world, the one, the only Nature Boy,
Ric Flair.
Crazy. And even the Hollywood Blondes, the champions, being introduced last, even though Flair got the biggest pop, and they have over 100 title defenses. Presenting professional wrestling heavyweight tag team champions of the world, Flying Brian, Stunning Steve, the Hollywood Blondes.
Well, I just like that it just eventually evolved into him being on every Nitro.
Yeah.
It's like,
but that was the start of it, and it got everyone so hyped and goosebumps. And even just now, and Jesse Ventura even saying that Michael Buffer really knows how to set a table. But yeah, that was one of my most favorite clashes, June 16th, 1993. And not to be outdone, happy one more birthday, June 16th. Happy belated 23rd birthday to a future rising star that I cannot wait to see on the bigger stage. Happy 23rd birthday to Jungle Boy Jack Perry.
Oh wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I just saw him today on national TV, but that if done right, and I keep saying this, I firmly believe in the slight a tangent. Jungle Boy's big break is not going to be in AEW. He he's going to be a star in the WWE, but he's got to get there first. Which brings me to today in wrestling history. St. Louis. We're back in St. Louis. Remember all the great cards I've told you about before, Dan, that happened in St. Louis?
Yes.
Well, here's another one. June 17th, 1977. The aforementioned AWA Tag Team Champions, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell, defeated the former champions, Blackjack Lanza and Bobby Duncombe, with Bobby Heenan in their corner. The NWA champion, Harley Race, defeated the Missouri State champion, the number 2 champion in the NWA. Harley Race defeated Jack Briscoe. And the WWF heavyweight champion, Superstar Billy Graham, took 11 minutes and 3 seconds to defeat a very young Bob Slaughter before he was a sergeant.
Nice.
So you had the AWA Tag Team Champions, the NWA Heavyweight Champion, and the WWF Heavyweight Champion on the same card. And Superstar Billy Graham going up against a very young Sergeant Slaughter. It was June 17th, 1977. Staying on that date, June 17th, 1983. World Class in Dallas, Texas at the Reunion Arena. 21,000 folks on hand to see Kerry Von Erich get his first NWA title shot against Harley Race. It went to a disqualification. Also, Kevin Von Erich and Bruiser Brody defeated the real Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. And 2 great angles came out of this card. The first Star Wars, that's what they call their Stargate, Star Wars. June 17, 1983, Iceman King Parsons defeated Freebird Buddy Roberts in a hair versus hair match. So Buddy Roberts got his hair removed, and for the next time you saw him, he was wrestling with the boxing headgear on in all of his future matches with the Freebirds and against Iceman Parsons. But that put Iceman Parsons on the map as a single star, and he would team up with the Von Erichs and get a lot of the rub, and would carry World Class when the Von Erichs were gone. And whenever I saw any of the World Class documentaries, the one that WWE did and the one that was independently promoted, the one thing was missing on both of those DVDs was Iceman Parsons, who was he wasn't on either one of them. No interviews, no nothing. And if anyone would know, or anyone has the inner workings of the Von Erichs, of being on the ground floor of the start of the World Class dominant run, and he was at all the Parade of Champions. He was teamed up with all the Von Erichs at different times. He was right there in the thick of it in the Sportatorium. He would get mobbed just as much as the Von Erichs would on their way to the ring. But on both of those excellent DVDs about the history of World Class, the only thing missing, my only criticism, and if you could even call that, was there was no Iceman Parsons. Now, whether I'm sure they asked him, or whether he said no or didn't want anything to do with it, I don't know. But I still, the story that needs to be told from that perspective of World Class has to be from Iceman Parsons, because he was right there alongside the Von Erichs, and he knew more of anything. I'd like to hear his side of the story. And the other great angle that came out of that card at the World Class show at the Reunion Arena with 21,000 folks was David Von Erich defeating Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin for the Texas Heavyweight title, but the stipulation being if David Von Erich won, then Jimmy Garvin and Sunshine would be his valet for a day. And some of the great pictures from the After magazines that showed Jimmy Garvin and Sunshine washing David Von Erich's dog and cleaning out his stables, and it made for some great TV in world class, record-breaking ratings. But two great angles came out of that: Buddy Roberts losing his hair, and Jimmy Garvin and Sunshine having to be David Von Erich's valets for a day. June 17th, today in wrestling history, 1985, 35 years ago today, Dan,
Thanks.
may be one of the greatest television tapings in WWF history took place on this date, today, in 1985. First of all, Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo regained the WWF Tag Team Championship from the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. You may recall the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov won the tag team titles from Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo at WrestleMania that year, 3 months prior. Well, they regained it with the classic small package by the Iron Sheik on Mike Rotunda. Rotunda was pinned. Volkov came around and, Sheik was pinned. Volkov reversed it, walked out of the ring. Referees pushing Volkov out, and Wyndham reversed it back. So then the referee finally did turn around. He saw Mike Rotundo pinning the Iron Sheik with a small package because Volkov wasn't going to take one. And Wyndham and Rotundo regained the WWF Tag Team Championship. Also, making their debut, Masked Confusion, or as you know them as the Killer Bees, made their WWF debut on that taping today in 1985. And also making his debut.
My God, you are not effing around tonight.
I am not. Also making his debut on that same TV taping that the WWF Tag Team titles changed hands, the Killer Bees debut. It was also the debut of the Macho Man, Randy Savage.
Nice.
Making his debut, and all of the managers, Freddie Blassie, Lou Albano, Johnny V, Jimmy Hart, Slick, all came out to scout Randy Savage. And even Vince McMahon's worried, calling him the hottest free agent in professional wrestling. So all those managers were at ringside talking about and pointing to Randy Savage.
Wow.
And if that debut wasn't enough, and by God, don't you think it ought to be, on this very same TV taping was, next to Chris Jericho, my favorite debut of any wrestler ever. June 17th, today, 1985, was the WWF debut of Terry Funk.
Oh, my God.
Terry Funk, folks, came to the ring in full cowboy gear. He had the chaps on, he had the vest, he had scarf, he had a branding iron. And see, back then there was a ring attendant named Mel Phillips who would take the clothes of the wrestlers, the ring jackets or something like that. But Terry Funk had so much stuff. He was holding the chaps, he was holding the vest, he was holding the branding iron. And when Terry Funk took off his cowboy hat, Mel Phillips' hands were full. So he took Terry's cowboy hat and he put it on himself just so he can carry all the rest of Terry's gear. Terry Funk looked at Mel Phillips, who put his cowboy hat on, and went berserk. He punched Mel Phillips, physically attacked him, threw him into the ring, kicked the living crap out of him, and beat the piss out of the ring attendant, the guy that was just there to carry his clothes back to the dressing room. And he beat the hell out of the ring attendant, Mel Phillips, and that was his debut in the WWF. Knowing what we know about Mel Phillips now, Terry Funk didn't beat him enough. But that was the debut of Terry Funk.
I was going to ask, but you know what? We've had enough of that serious talk this week. Never mind.
Yes.
I just remembered. I'm like, never mind. We're skipping it.
Yes, we're skipping this. And finally, on this date, 1996, Dan, the tournament, the finals of the USWA Tag Team Tournament. Brickhouse Brown and Reggie B. Fine lost to the team of Bart Sawyer and Flex Cavana. So Flex Cavana on this date, 1996, would win his first title ever in professional wrestling.
Flex Cavana is who, Craig?
That would be one Dwayne Johnson, a.k.a. The Rock.
Who, let me just say, to circle back to the original discussion on part 1, or part A of this episode, said one of the best things throughout the last month and a half, by simply asking a question. Where are you?
Where are you? Yeah. The video that Dwayne Johnson made went viral within seconds, asking for leadership, for which we apparently don't have.
By the way, my favorite part about that, just to lighten it up for a second, is right at the end, the penultimate moments of that video, his phone rings and he doesn't move. He doesn't break. Because you can see him go, yep, phone's ringing.
Yep,
Somebody else better fucking answer that. He doesn't move. It's just the Rock language. Like,
exactly.
Anyway, round this out, buddy.
I just did. We ended it with the first title win ever of Flex Cavana, 24 years ago today, and that is a wrestling historian.
And it's been a good week. Lots of stories, lots of things to talk about. Not all wrestling this week. Whether you're watching Part A or Part B or listening to both, I think it was one of my favorite episodes we've ever done, Craig. So I thank you. With that being said, where can people follow you?
They can follow me if they want on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter at Craig Ligons, CraigLiggeons.
Follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. The HIAC Wrestling Podcast is proudly part of the VOC Nation Radio Network, VOCNation.com. If you're on an iPhone, if you're on any smartphone, go to your podcast app, type in the VOC Nation Radio Network. Once again, VOC Nation, voice of choice, VOC Nation Radio Network. Or if you want to watch us live, if you're not watching us live, twitch.tv/DanLaw83 every Wednesday, and watch every day at 8 o'clock, please. Or youtube.com/DanLaw83 to watch it later. For Craig Ligons, I'm the Above Average Comedian, Dan Calchico. We'll see you next week, hopefully without any technical difficulties. Thank you to all. Reverend Julia, Momo, D-Hugs I saw on here. Go Sox was on here. Viral was on here. Mystery 001. Aegon for the host. Senpai. Sub to Senpai was watching too. Thank you all for hanging in there during the technical difficulties and the many more that came through the room. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.